Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Goldberg. I'm the president of League Apps, and it is my pleasure to be the host and welcome you to another edition of Junior NBA Live. Now, the Junior NBA was all over this kind of virtual programming even before we got into this COVID crisis. We've done a lot of these Junior NBA Lives, but I'm excited to bring this particular conversation to you today because it's so critical. There's this question around mental health of young athletes, especially at a time when our communities and our coaches need as many resources as possible to navigate kind of the mental health challenges that the kids and families are going through. And more importantly, building that muscle within your organization so you could be there for your communities even after this crisis. One thing about the NBA is they never stop trying to figure out ways to add value to local grassroots organizations and to junior NBA affiliates. And so today is just one of the many ways they're trying to do that. I'd encourage you to go to thejuniornba.com and you could see all of the incredible programs. This Friday, for example, there's an incredible conference that they're running. It's the Junior NBA Leadership Conference that they brought online. It's powered by Under Armour. You've got Steph Curry that's speaking, Adam Silver. You've got Rick Carlisle as a Dallas Mavs fan. I'm excited about that. The former U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. So we'll go ahead and put that link in the chat tool so you can sign up for that. But that free event is another great way for you to take advantage of the resources that the Junior NBA is providing. But without further ado, I'm excited to welcome in two incredible guests for today's conversation. We've got Dr. Gunter, who is not only a consultant for the Mind Health program that the NBA has put together, but she's also a clinical sports psychologist. She is the program chair for sport and exercise psychology at Argosy University for years before being part of the Anxiety and Stress Management Institute. And she also is a talented sports player herself, played basketball and a competitive swimmer as well. And so we're excited. I know I noted in the bio that you are a sci-fi and superhero fanatic. And so we'll thank you for being our hero, for helping to bring so much value to the community. And you'll tell us at the end of this what superhero Andre Barrett reminds you most of. To me, he reminded me of a great point guard. I remember how he played at Seton Hall as a Georgetown grad, way too many ways of seeing how dominant of a player he was. And everyone knows about his career that he had in the NBA and the G League, but he's also, for the NBA, the youth basketball program manager. And he's really working to provide as much value to the grassroots, especially the elite basketball ecosystem, as he can. So thank you both for being here today and for being part of this important discussion. And interestingly enough, the NBA was already focused on this as a topic and as a priority pre-COVID. In fact, this was a topic that we actually did a Junior NBA Live one a few months ago. But now we come back to this, Dr. Gunter, because we're at an unprecedented time of not only the stress that families are dealing with and kids are dealing with the question of COVID and the disruption they experience, but also the fact that they can't play sports. So how do you think about articulating those challenges that a youth sports organization is facing right now? These basketball programs, these basketball coaches, what are the challenges they need to think about navigating?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks, Jeremy, for that intro, and thank you to all of those who are attending. I think this is a very unique time that we're experiencing it. And one of the first things that comes to mind when I think about your question and what people are experiencing is loss. I mean, not being able to participate in your sport can be a huge loss because not only does it represent an opportunity for young athletes to compete and show their talent and skills, but what we know is that it also is an opportunity for them to connect with their friends, for them to learn some of those life lessons that we want to teach in terms of leadership and working with others and developing the esteem and confidence. And right now they're not able to participate in that part of their lives, right? And so there's a huge loss that goes along with that. And then, it's also just a space where kids can go and play, right? And they're not able to have that right now. So I think it's a big loss that I think we all need to be aware of for the students and for the families as well, because a lot of times some family activities revolve around the kids' sports schedule, be that right, wrong, or indifferent. That's a fact of life. And so that could be a family activity that is now been taken away as well. And so I think it's a very challenging time, especially because we don't know when that will change and what it will look like once it does change.
Yeah, you can get a sense of that loss when you see how excited people are about the Jordan documentary. I think I saw one tweet from a reporter that described it was almost like the Super Bowl because it felt like sports was going to be back on again, and everyone's reliving the NBA through its past right now because they're so miss sports so much. Andre, to bring you into the conversation, I mean, I imagine throughout your career you've had to deal with loss. Maybe you were injured, you weren't able to play, the game was taken away for you. How did you personally try to navigate and cope with that when you weren't able to play the game?
Well, mentally, that's a big part of being able to be, you know, an elite athlete. If you're not there mentally and you're not, you know, focused on your craft or things that you do, then you're not going to be able to display, you know, your talent at 100%. So for me, you know, dealing with loss, and basketball has always been, you know, the escape for me mentally, you know, even, you know, losing, you know, my father or, you know, close family members, like you can always go to the court and mentally get away from that and enjoy yourself. So now with this loss of, you know, like Dr. Gunter said, not being able to play basketball and you know, other youth sports, these kids are missing that and they need to get that escape and they're not able to have it.
Yeah, it's almost like as I was listening to you speak, Dr. Gunter, there's like a double whammy here, right? The first is the loss that you're experiencing. The second is what you're actually losing is sport, which is teaching you about resiliency, which is giving you community, which magnifies the way that you might have to deal with that loss. So let's get practical right away for this kind of conversation. What's the advice you want to give out there for basketball coaches, for basketball organizers about how they approach this loss? What's the responsibility or opportunity they have to address that with the players in their organization?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to be honest about it and acknowledge it, right? Like I think sometimes we have a difficult time allowing space for challenging emotions like sadness and loss that might go along with not playing sports. So I think the first thing is just to acknowledge that that's what the youth may be experiencing. And for that matter, the coaches are likely experiencing it too. I mean, there's an investment that they put into participating in sport as well. And so once you acknowledge that it's there, I think it also creates an opportunity for us to think about how we can go about teaching those lessons in other ways. Certainly we know that sport is a vehicle and allows a space for that, but what are some other things we can do? I think if there's a way for coaches to stay in touch with their athletes, if there's a way to still have the athletes collectively get together virtually so that they can still see one another and still have some of that team feel, that may be something that they can do. But I also recognize to do that, you have to have access to technology, right? And then we get into thinking about some of the differences, the socioeconomic differences that may exist for those who participate in youth sport. And I think that's the other thing is sometimes youth sport can be an equalizer because it creates an opportunity where independent of background, you can come and participate. And now that they're not able to have that space, I think we do have to think a bit more creatively about how we can access and still connect with those youth who still need that connection and that touch point. We just have to be really creative about how we do it. And there's an opportunity there for us to think about how we reach out and connect, even in the midst of being physically distant.
It's almost like it's I feel like we're going through a moment where we're experiencing the greatest brand exercise ever, which is if you had to figure out how to deliver value as a youth basketball program, but I told you that you couldn't actually run any basketball programs on a court.
Right.
Like, how would you do that?
What do you do?
Right. And if you can answer that question, right, you're recognizing that there's something much bigger that you're about than simply what happens on the court, and you'll be that much more effective when it comes to getting back on that court. So I like what you said, and I think part of it is that acknowledgement of loss. There's a podcast I was listening to recently, which was talking about how humans deal with relationships. I actually found this with my wife, which was basically some people, it's not about solving the problem. Sometimes it's just about acknowledging that there's a problem, right? And letting them have space to grieve or to have that space to acknowledge the loss. Andre, to bring you in here, Dr. Gunter was mentioning, strategies of saying, hey, what's the way to stay present, notwithstanding the fact that you may have kids that have different kinds of access to technology. What do you think is the opportunity right now for a youth basketball coach or a youth basketball organization and the role that they can play in helping kids kind of navigate all the uncertainty that exists in their lives, and especially the loss of being able to ball?
Well, I think a great way of putting that together is through Zoom, like how we're doing right now, and getting your team together and talking about the mental part of basketball, different things that you can see within basketball, but have a discussion, an open discussion where the guys can actually see each other. They can see their teammates, visually, get a chance to have that camaraderie that they might not have had, now that the situation it's that it is now. And also, I think by also having a team come together, certain programs and looking at things like home court, things like junior NBA at home, and having a team bonding, thing where they're doing that drills and the skill things together. They might not be with each other, but they're together in spirit, and they're together through virtually.
Yeah, it's a great point as you talk about the strategies to be connected. I've heard of some of the NBA flagship network members. One in particular was running a virtual horse tournament where they were playing around, or another I think was doing a virtual workout, and it wasn't just about the workout, but you had to like dribble up a stairs and film yourself doing it at the same time. So you're engaging kids, so they're reminding them of the joy that's being part of it and being part of what that community could look like. Dr. Gunter, it seems like one of the challenges here is the isolation, right? That you're not able to really see your friends or be part of a team or community. How do you, at a time of physical distancing, can you talk about why it's so important to remain socially connected, and what are the strategies that a coach or an organization might use to kind of continue this kind of social connections?
Yeah, social connection is important for our overall mood and our overall mental health and well-being. I mean, there's research that supports that the more connected we feel, the more positive we feel about ourselves and the more positive we feel about the world around us. And so I really, and also social support is one of those integral factors in developing resilience. And so that's why it's important, is because maintaining that social connection, even though we're physically distant, really does have mental health benefits and can help kids to, all of us really, to tap into those internal strengths that we have, but we may not have had to use in a situation like this. And so I think I agree with what Andre is saying. Certainly if there's the capacity to get together virtually, just having that visual component adds a lot for people to be able to see their friends and to see other people, and also to realize that they're not alone in this. Right? I think being physically isolated from everyone and from your friends and just being around your family, sometimes it can feel like you're the only kid going through this. But being able to connect and see that your friends are going through it too, but you can still connect and still engage in activities. I love the idea of having kids film themselves doing something and then sharing it with their teams or sharing it with their coaches. Because again, that reminds us that even though we are having our individual experiences with this, depending on what your particular family is dealing with, we're still all in this together, and maintaining that visual bond and connection really can go a long way towards helping us to continue to navigate this until we get to the other side of that curve.
As you're talking about it, I think one thing that's, I think, a valuable lesson that I think we can extract from this conversation is, one, you want to be there for your kids because it's the right thing to do, because they're looking for you. And as Andre was saying, in many cases, this was an escape. They needed their organization. They needed their team as they were dealing with the circumstances that they were facing in life. And there's also, we'll talk about this, an important part of being a great organization moving forward, because the mental side of things, mental health, mental performance, is a big part of being a great athlete, of being someone who succeeds in the world. But also, if you can represent the value of sport, and you can do this as an organization, as parents are making choices to come back to play over the next couple of months, they're that much more likely to want to be part of your program if you could talk about the mental benefits, the health benefits associated with play. Andre, maybe you could personalize this for a little bit for us, because when it comes to like the resiliency that you learn through sport, is there a story you can share, an example you can share of how sport helped you learn how to navigate really difficult circumstances, and why that was so important to you?
I would say in college, learning how to be a leader. When I was in high school, our team was just so good. My job was just to come in and do my job, just come in, play it at my best ability, compete. When I got to college, the talent wasn't as good as it was in college, but I was in a tough conference in the Big East. And I had to learn how to become a leader, more of a vocal leader, not just, show by actions. And I think through sports, by me being able to become a leader, it allowed me to be able to, have these conversations, be able to go out and speak to other people, the youth, and also be prideful in what I do. In order to be a leader, you have to, have some type of confidence in yourself and believe in what you're saying. So, through sports, I learned how to become a real good leader and lead my team, as well as, now I'm able to lead the youth.
I think that's great. And I think I want to pull in some practical tips here. And Dr. Gunter, the first thing I take from Andre's comment is, how do you think about yourself, right? As you're trying to be there for your coaches, you're trying to be there for your families that are in your program. What are the practices that you might use yourself to establish the kind of resiliency as you're dealing? In many cases, these organizations are dealing with questions about their own financial viability, of layoffs, of furloughs, of closed facilities, of health concerns or economic concerns for their family, especially if they're not doing this full time. So how do you manage yourself Because I imagine that's an important part of then being able to be there as a leader for your organization, your community.
Yeah, it's very tough. Like, I want to acknowledge the difficulty of that, because no matter what coping strategy I share next, that doesn't necessarily change the economic difficulties that people may be facing, the fact that people may be losing jobs. And so I don't want to minimize it and say that there's a coping strategy that can allow you to negate that reality, right? So in the context of that reality, though, I still think it's sometimes easy for us to, especially in an ongoing situation like this, it's easier sometimes to focus on what we've lost and to focus on what we feel like we don't have control over. And so really one of the things that I encourage people to do is to try to look for those silver lining moments, the thing, all is not lost, right? And sometimes just identifying the things that we still have, recognizing the things that are lost, but still recognizing the things that we still have, identifying the areas where we do have some control, and doing our best to use our control in the way that we can. Granted, it may not be to the degree that we all kind of exerted control pre-COVID, but focusing on the present moment, identifying what you have control over now, identifying what's not lost, so what's still present in your life. And actually, what the research shows is practicing gratitude, like expressing a gratefulness for what you still have. Again, I reiterate, that does not take away from the things that have been lost. And there can be a lot of emotion associated with that. But when you are also expressing what you're grateful for, or being able to express that gratitude for things that are still present, it balances it out a bit. Because if we just focus on what's lost, it's easy for us to fall into a spiral of anxiety, sadness, just focusing on the uncertainty, on the unknown. And again, that's there, but there are also some things that we can be grateful for. And this is an opportunity for us to teach our kids that as well, right? To teach our kids that greatness and navigating, greatness and reaching levels of success is not about never going through adversity. It's about being able to learn how to navigate adversity. And that's what makes people great, is being able to navigate it.
It's such a great point. And one thing I remember, there was an author by the name of Tim Ferriss who studied 250 leaders of different disciplines, for-profit, nonprofit, business, and he looked at kind of common denominators of practices that they had for success. And one of those common denominators was a morning ritual that almost the majority of them had. And a core part of that morning ritual was this idea of gratitude. What are 3 things that you might be grateful for, regardless of all the other things that might be problematic? Can you find some opportunity to be grateful for? Can you teach others about that gratitude? And again, to your point, it's a different frame by which to approach any challenge. Andre, to pull you back in here, one of the amazing parts about sports is it teaches us through losses, right? That when you go through adversity, you go through that experience and you figure out some way, somehow, to be better for it, a better team, a better individual, a better teammate. I'm curious, when you think about your own story, is there a particular moment in your career where you think about a loss or you think about a setback, and ultimately how you ultimately thought about how you were able to be better for it?
I think, as a competitor, any game that you lose, you learn from it. They always say when you lose, you really don't lose, you win. It's about how you bounce back from it. And, that's what this is about during this time. It's all about how we bounce back from it. We're going to be, through the sport, the game of basketball, there's a lot of ups and downs. And they always say you always have to stay even keel, because you can't get too high, you can't get too low. But when when you have some losses, you got to figure out how to bounce back from it and be better. And I think we're learning now how to be better from this situation.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the Jordan documentary I alluded to earlier. There's a great quote where he talked about his parents signing him up for organized sports, and it wasn't because they anticipated him or wanting him to become the best athlete, a best basketball player of all time. It was because they wanted. I think the line in the documentary was they wanted him to do organized sports to teach him about life, right? The organized sports is about life. And so to your point about resiliency, the ability to handle those kinds of losses, I think that's how you think about navigating a situation like this. Dr. Gunter, when you put yourself in the shoes of the organizations, they're now faced with thinking about return to play in some areas. And as they think about that, the first thing is the idea that you might be able to play, but it's going to be different, or you might have to wear a mask, or you might have to start and might have to stop, or you might not be able to play tournaments the same kind of way. So how does an organization help navigate that uncertainty as they're communicating towards families and parents to both provide reassurance, but also recognize that we're not out of the woods yet, that there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, to use kind of Andre's phrase?
Again, I think it's that a matter of being very honest in your communications and not over promising anything, right? Because the situation is changing every day and even multiple moments throughout the day. So I think it's being very transparent and speaking about whatever you're doing to ensure the safety of the athletes, communicating that very clearly, knowing that safety is the utmost priority in any of our efforts. And so being very clear about what it is that you and your organization are doing to ensure safety, while also continuing to monitor any guidelines that come out from our healthcare officials, right? And making adjustments as needed. But I think that's the reality of it. It's an ongoing, ever evolving situation. And as more information comes out, that will be incorporated into any plans that organizations implement, again, with the safety of the kids at the forefront of any discussions and decisions. And I think you're just very honest and transparent about that. And this may be an opportunity for, sometimes we have to practice saying, I don't know the answer to that right now, right? Because we can't predict what things are going to happen. We can put forth a plan that has safety at the forefront and then make adjustments as needed. And that's, I think, what you can communicate to parents and what you communicate to families who are thinking about, like, what does return to play look like? There's one other piece that I wanted to say really quickly is, even though athletes can't participate in sport right now, they can still engage in physical activity, because we know there are a lot of benefits from continuing to engage in physical activity as well. And so if it's possible, in a safe way, for a kid to go outside and bounce the ball or practice on skills, like, that still has a lot of benefit as well and can help the kids stay connected to the activity. And although they can't compete with others, or maybe they can, you can create a competition amongst teammates and kind of do that virtually, right? Whether it's shooting a certain number of shots in a certain number of time, or making a certain number of shots, whatever it may be. Again, if you're able to go outside and do those things safely, there are ways to create competitive moments, even in the midst of still engaging in physical activity, although we can't necessarily be together.
Yeah, I like what you said about not only the prioritization of physical activity, but also this question of honesty and being the willing to be vulnerable. And as a leader, not necessarily saying, hey, I can't say if this is going to be shut down or it's not going to be, it's going to happen. There's a lot of you can't control. There's a great book called The Culture Code that where they talked about why did the San Antonio Spurs win? Why was Greg Popovich so successful for building up that program and the culture they've created? And one aspect of that was his willingness to be vulnerable, right? Is that there's times where you don't have all the answers. So all you can do is commit to be honest. And if you do that, you earn people's kind of trust and respect. Andre, when you think about the coaches that have had the biggest impact on you, especially when it came to not just the on-court performance, but really in life, right? In the mental side of things. Is there a coach in particular that comes to mind, or something that they did that is the reason why they were so impactful for you and beyond just what happens on the court?
I think my youth coach, coach by the name of Artie Green, he coached me since I was 8 years old. And the things that he taught me, it pertained to life, but it was through basketball. Just all types of things, from being a leader to setting examples to, being polite to other people, adults, just teaching me how to be a young man. And I still go by those things to this day. And it's helped me throughout my whole life.
Yeah, one thing I think about is we live at a time where people talk about YouTube stars, right? We talk about, if you're, Peloton stars, or people in their, like, they're these stars that they build up. And I almost think, like, how do we make our youth basketball coaches stars, right? How do we elevate them and the roles that they can have, because they can have the kind of impact that, Andre, you can sit here years later and still think about what those lessons are. So Dr. Gunter, one thing I think a lot of the coaches that are listening have an opportunity to do is to think about what's the role they can play in their community, not just for the kids that are in their program, but even beyond that, if they want to be a leader here, especially on the mental health side of things, where it's not just about the navigating the COVID crisis, it's also the economic crisis that might follow. It may be also the circumstances in kids' lives that they were already contending with, especially in communities of color, where they already faced a lot of challenges that may be magnified here. So what is that opportunity? How if someone's inspired to say, hey, I want to play a bigger role here, what resources can you direct them to, or what might you suggest for them to be able to play that kind of role?
Yeah, I think the way we deal with emotions and mental health in our society is thus far, it's been a very interesting and stigmatizing thing, right? Because the reality is usually when we say the term mental health, people automatically think about mental illness. So if I say to you, how's your mental health? What people will respond, they'll think about anxiety, they'll think about depression, they'll think about trauma, right? But here's the reality. There are 1 in 5 adults in the US in any given year that have a mental illness. There are 1 in 6 youth age 6 to 17 in any given year that have a mental illness. But all of us have mental health, right? Because mental health is not about those times when we're struggling necessarily. Mental health can be about how are we being resilient? How are we tapping into our internal strength? And so I think what our coaches can do is try to expand their idea and their knowledge about what mental health is and communicate and model what it's like to experience and manage emotions in a healthy way. So I think it's okay for coaches to say, you know what, I'm feeling a bit anxious too about this, the unknown and the uncertainty that we're facing in our society, right? I think it's okay for them to say that. It's okay for them to potentially say, and, you know, maybe I'm enjoying time spent with my family that I wouldn't have this time normally. So I'm enjoying that as well. I think it's important for coaches to be able to show both and to share a little bit about honestly how they may be feeling as well, because that may give athletes permission to do the same. And I know we're talking about coaches in the context of the athletes that they work with on their teams, but I think there are many youth, right, that the coaches and those on the call may come into contact with who aren't in organized sports, who also just want to get out and engage in some physical activity. And so I think if there's a way, again, doing it safely for you to engage and play with the youth in your life, again, whether we're talking about in the context of your team or not, this can be a really cool opportunity just to return to physical activity, right? Whether it's just going outside and going for a walk, again, doing all of that safely. I want to reiterate that, but it doesn't have to be in the context of sport, or it doesn't just have to be with those who are a part of your sports leagues or on your team, but any youth, the youth that you're connected with in your home, even if they're not in organized capacities, can benefit from movement and physical activity.
Andre, I'll give you the final word because I think Dr. Gunter said this well, which is all of us have mental health. And it seems like the mental side of the game, it's not just about surviving this crisis. It's ultimately about how you become the best player that you can be, the best person that you can be, and ultimately the best teammate. So talk about why the mental side of the game made such an impact in your career and why you think it's so important as we wrap.
The mental side is everything, I believe. I remember when I was maybe in the 10th grade, I had Mark Jackson tell me that basketball is 90% mental and 10% physical. And I really didn't understand that at the time because I'm thinking like, you know, physically, you just come out there and play. It's not much thinking. You just go out there and play. But then as you start to think about it, your mental is everything. If you're not mentally there, you won't be at your best ability. If, mentally you don't push yourself, how can you be a great player? So those things, it started to register as I started to get older and I became a better player. But mentally, I was at the top of, when I was at the top of my game, mentally I was focused. I was focused on and off the court. And that's a big help. That's a big help as far as, youth all the way up into being a professional. If you watch the documentary with The Last Dance, Jordan's mental was on another level as far as compared to any other player. And you can hear some Hall of Fame players say, I don't know how he did this. I don't know how he, did a whole movie and found time to, play pickup with us and also do the other things, checking in with the family. Because, he had a family, he had kids, he had a lot of things going on. But mentally, if you're not strong enough to be able to do that, then how can you be the best player that you want to be?
Right. And I'll say, can I piggyback on that just real quick, Jeremy?
Jump in.
To say, I know we're talking about the athlete and we're talking about the competitor and the competition piece, but remember, these young people are people first, right? If you have a healthy person, you'll have a healthy athlete. So this may have opened up and created an opportunity for us to really think about the person of the athletes that we're dealing with and to really think about how we can connect person to person, us to young person, and help develop them as a person. Because again, if you have a healthy person, you're likely to have a healthy athlete. And it's really important to understand that all athletes, regardless of level, are people first.
Yeah, and one
I
more
think that's
thing.
a great.
one more thing, and also with coaches and mentors, you know, just being able to reach out to those kids and let them know that they care about them more than just basketball. You know, as a player, you want, you know, your coach, your mentor, those guys to reach out to you to see how you're doing as a person. This is a perfect time and a perfect opportunity to reach out to those players and just see how you're doing. Like, it has nothing to do with basketball, because that is part of the whole mental aspect. If mentally you're reaching out to me and I feel that support, then I'm in a better state of mind. I'm feeling the support, I'm feeling the love, and that can go a long way, rather than, you know, what you can do on the court.
As you said, we learn through loss. Right now the game has been taken away, and as we go through this period, how to use this pause. And if you can use that to show the kind of coach you are, the kind of organization you are, you can have a profound impact, not just on your players, but them as human beings. So I encourage you to go on junior.nba.com. They've got incredible resources, a bunch of skills and drills from Headspace on this. I want to thank Dr. Gunter and thank Andre Barrett for being part of this. This was an inspiring conversation. And again, we want to thank every one of the Junior NBA affiliates and the local coaches doing such important work. You know, you as we talk about superheroes, you all can be heroes in the lives of the players and in your community. So we thank you for playing that role. And thank you all for joining us. This was the Junior NBA live webinar. Signing off. Have a great day.